Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am your host, Alan Moore, and I am so thankful and excited that you have joined us today. As you know, we are in launch week, so we are featuring episodes all week with folks such as Michael Kitsis, Sophia Berra, Mark Maurer, Jeff Rose, Eric Roberge, and Jake Keebler. So this is an exciting week of just tons of great content. But today, we are featuring none other than Carl Richards, author of The Behavior Gap. Now, Carl, as you may or may not know, has had a fascinating path in financial planning, including how he actually got into kind of the securities industry because he was actually applying for a security job thinking he was going to be a bouncer. And so today's interview actually goes through his path of becoming a financial planner and then how he ended up becoming an author and then an artist with absolutely no art background. This interview is really wide-ranging, but we spent a lot of time focusing on his financial planning process from introductory meeting all the way through plan delivery. You really want to listen in all the way through this episode because I don't think you can ever walk away from talking to Carl without learning something that's going to positively impact your business. And this is really a look under the hood of how Carl Richards provides financial planning. Now, before we kick off the interview, I want to thank our launch week sponsor, Low Load Insurance Services. Low Load provides life, disability, annuity, long-term care insurance services to the clients of fee-only advisors. So if you're looking for an insurance company that can handle all of the needs of your clients, LLIS is the place to go. And definitely check out episode 5 for an in-depth interview with Mark Maurer, the CEO of LLIS. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am so excited to have our guest today on. It is Carl Richards, author of The Behavior Gap. I have known Carl for, I guess, really since I got into the profession, have been watching his work and just love getting the opportunity to chat with him at conferences and things like that. So, Carl, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Really, genuinely, I know everybody always says this, thanks for having me, but genuinely excited, looking forward to it.
You know, you have such a unique story. I mean, you really do, from kind of, I guess, not even being an advisor, which we can talk about, all the way through being a financial advisor to now kind of being the coach of advisors. So could you just give us a quick background on kind of where you came from and how you came to be The Behavior Gap? Yes,
it's hard to tell that story without starting at the beginning, so I'll try and make it quick. And I'm sure some people have heard the story because I tell it everywhere I go. My wife's so sick of it. But early on, I was an undergrad at the University of Utah. I was an undeclared major. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And one day we were looking through the newspaper and we found, for a job for like the evenings or whatever, so I could go to school full time. And we found what we were sure was a security. It said something about security. And I thought, bouncer, mall cop, like flexibility, cool. I'll do this at night and I can still go to school. I go to apply for the job. Make a long story short, about halfway through the interview, I found out it wasn't about security. The word in the ad was securities, not security. And I didn't know the difference. And, it tells you a little bit about the applicant pool that day that I made it through the interview. And that was sort of, I'm shortening it a bunch, but that was kind of how I got in the industry, quite by accident. But quickly, really quickly, I had this experience where I realized, and I've had it almost daily since, where I realized that this business that I thought was about numbers and spreadsheets wasn't about that at all. That it was about, and so I got into the industry by accident, but I stayed on purpose because I realized, wow, this isn't about numbers and spreadsheets. It's about emotions and fear and greed and worry and dreams and, the stuff that keeps people up at night. Like, I actually thought I wanted to be an organizational behavior guy. Like, I grew up in this sort of Stephen Covey part of the country and in that era. And I thought, how cool to help people figure out their work. And then, through this accidental discovery of money, I realized, like, there's no better way to help people live more aligned lives than helping them get clear about their relationship with money. Like even more important than their relationship with their profession would be their relationship with money. So that's how I got into the business, and that's the reason why I stayed. And like the short version of the how did you get where you are now story is just really honestly, I started having this repeated experience, which I bet everybody listening to this can relate to. I'm sure you've all had it, right? So imagine a conference room table with two people, a couple that you care about in almost an unusual way because they've shared things with you that they've probably shared with no one else. Their fears and their dreams, they've probably cried in your office. And they're there trying to make a really important decision about money. And your job is to educate them. And you think there's this so that they can make the right decision, right? Or at least they can trust you to help to take your advice. And maybe there's this critical issue, this piece of information that you think they have to understand in order to make this decision. And so you're trying to explain it to them. Right. So just imagine yourself in that situation. And if you're like me, and you're like almost every advisor I've ever talked to, you've had the experience where you're doing your best. These are smart, intelligent people, so it's not their fault, but you're doing your best and all you're getting is blank stares. And I had that moment where I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And out of an act of desperation, I said, no, like this. And I stood up at the whiteboard and I drew. And if I remember right, it was an estate planning or insurance thing. And I just drew a couple simple boxes with arrows. And I said, no, the money will go, from here to here. And they said, oh, I get it. Right? I get it. I understand now. That experience was singular in terms of its impact on my wait a second. What if I just did that with every concept that I couldn't figure out how to help people understand? Standard deviation, asset allocation, tax impact, all the emotional behavioral stuff. What if I just did that with all of them? And I started putting them up on this little website, and one thing grew to another, and I got an invite to do it for a large newspaper, and I knew from my security guard background to say yes to that. And one thing grew to another, and to the point where I was like, well, I want to do this more often. I want to help real advisors around the country get better at having those kind of discussions.
Now, Carl, you're being modest because a big newspaper being the New York Times with a weekly column there, which is just fantastic exposure for not only, the work that you're doing, but what real financial planning is. And I think that that's a struggle we experience in the profession as a general, is just telling people what is it exactly that we do. And having met you in person quite a few times, I would say that I'm thankful that you are in the financial planning profession and not the bouncer profession, because I'm not sure how long you would have lasted.
I'm not sure how to take that, but I'll take it. Thank you very much.
Carl is a very, very fit guy. He's just not 6'7" and right. 250 pounds of solid muscle.
For sure.
And you relate that story sitting there with your client. And I think as you say, I think we've all been there. I mean, I remember the first time a client threw something in my office, and I was actually an intern at the time working with a firm, and it just clear across the room. And I remember thinking, is this what real financial planning is?
Yeah.
Because what do they teach us in college? In the CFP program, we never talk about this stuff. We only talk about the numbers, and you can't respond to something being thrown or tears or emotion with data. I mean, I'm assuming you see that all the time from advisors, that they try to respond to these situations with information.
No, it's such an important point. It's interesting. I was just having this conversation with somebody yesterday who his brother went to seminary to become, can't remember what exact religion it was, but it was just a sort of a Christian pastor. And he said, I know his brother was commenting I know the Bible really, really well. And then I get out to be a pastor and I realize, oh my gosh, it's not about the Bible, right? It's about counseling and comforting, and nobody taught me any of that. And I think that's sort of the same thing. We get into this situation where we're I naively expected, all I have to do, when I first read about this thing that I kind of labeled the behavior gap, the difference between investment return and investor return, to pick on one easy subject, I thought, oh, wow, nobody else probably knows this. All I have to do is go out and educate people. And so I started throwing facts and figures at it. And then you realize real quickly, And you could take any one of the things we're talking, education funding. I mean, how many times have I been in a room where I bring up educate, like, okay, let's talk a little bit about the kids. What was your goals there? How do you want to approach education funding? And one spouse will say something, and this, I mean, it seems education funding to be one of the hot ones, that it happens more often than not, where one spouse will say, I worked my way through school. These kids are going to work their way through school. It was the most valuable lesson I ever got. And the other spouse will be like, what? Really? I was prepared. I thought we were prepared to pay for any college they got into. And you're like, wait a second, is this the first time you guys have had this discussion? Like right here? So I think this idea of throwing facts and figures, which is sort of all we've been trained to do, you're trying to throw rational facts and figures at an irrational response to something. And if you want to know how well that works, just try it with a teenager. Right? Like trying to reason through an irrational decision they're making. You'll learn real quickly that doesn't work. What works is empathy and trust and listening, right? Asking really great questions to draw more answers out. And the interesting piece, back to what you said about real financial planning and not knowing what it is most, I could almost say almost all prospective clients don't know that that's what they want, right? They don't walk in saying, help me get clear about my life's goals and values. They walk in typically with an acute problem, right? Like, I've got this pool of money I've got to invest, or I need help with budgeting, or we got to figure out how to get serious about education funding. And you have to figure out how to carefully take it from that one acute problem to this broad underlying discussion of values and goals so that you can correctly diagnose and then prescribe, right? And I think that's a skill that nobody is talking about, and we are all running into it. And it's becoming, I think it's actually becoming critical. Like, if you want to stay in the business, you're going to have to figure out how to become better at asking good questions, listening carefully, diagnosing thoroughly before you prescribe.
Where do you think people can go to get this education? Because I was actually very fortunate that my college CFP program actually had a communications course, because we had a financial planning professor with a background in psychology, but there's only a couple programs out there that even have that. So where do you send folks to say, Carl, I want to learn how to talk to people? I mean, honestly, I want to learn the soft side of what we do. I shouldn't say soft skills. I hate that term, but the important part of what we do to be able to talk to clients. Where do you send them for that type of education and training?
That's a great question. I mean, first, just a comment. Like, I don't think it's the soft side. I don't think it's just the important side. I think it's actually becoming the singular critical element, right? Because everything else is going away. If you haven't figured that out yet, you better figure it out quickly, right? Like asset allocation, portfolio design, even some tax management issues, like all of that stuff's going away. What's going to remain at the end of the day about being a human advisor, sort of real financial advice, real financial planning, what's going to remain is that unique little spot between helping people align their kind of use of capital and what they say is important to them. Or you could make it even simpler and say their money and their life, and realize, like, it's not, there's that book, Your Money or Your Life. That's not what it is. It's your money and your life, right? Like, that's our job, is that overlap. So then where do you go to learn about it? Like, I'm really optimistic because we're talking more about it, right? Like, I mean, George Kinder did some early work, and I think that's one place you could send people is to George Kinder's work. There's some books outside of our industry, like Crucial Conversations is a great
It's a great book.
And then anything you can find about active listening, fascinating research I just read from a colleague of mine at BAM, Dan Sullen, who did some work on conversations and said that taking notes, actively taking notes in front of a client, actually decreases their sense of you listening because they think you're busy taking notes, which is interesting, right?
That's fascinating.
Yeah, like he suggests being, maybe having somebody else in the room over in the corner taking notes, recording, which I've done before, which I love. But anyway, the point being, like, where do you go to learn this stuff? We've got to get better about it. I am optimistic that we're talking more about it. We're seeing more material about communication. It's something I want to do a lot more work on, like trying to kind of codify the stuff that I've always done. And I don't know where I learned it. I'm a naturally curious person. And so I like pushing back against, like when somebody tells me I want to retire at 55 with this much money, I like the process of saying, well, would it be okay if we back up a little bit? Why? Like, where did you come up with that number? It sounds like you've got a specific plan in place here. Like, where did you come? And really pushing back against false assumptions and helping people uncover them themselves. Like, I've always thought of that as a puzzle and really fun, but I'm trying to do some more work in trying to, like, okay, what is it? What are the skills there? So I don't know where to send them. I mean, I hope to have more material myself to be helpful here in the coming months and years.
It's a question that I get a lot. And because one of the things I learned from working at a firm that we actually had a therapist that we contracted with to come in and help facilitate some of these conversations was that the skill was always being able to ask the next question. And as financial planners, we're trained to ask the question, listen to the answer, and move on. And folks with a counseling background are taught to dig deeper and to try to understand where the answer comes from. And I think that's kind of what you're hitting on is that, somebody saying, I want to retire at 55, we're trained with our case studies to just say, okay, great, this is how much you need to save to get there, without bothering to figure out why do you want to be there.
Yeah, and that's so and it's like, look, here's a real simple way to do it. Just start asking. I mean, my favorite thing to say is, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. And people leave that experience of their first, imagine how much different this is, right? Like, you're a client to be, right? That's my word for prospect. You're out looking for a financial advisor. Somehow you end up in your office, and instead of the normal thing, I mean, and I don't really care if this is a side note because it's so important. Like, realize, okay, so a couple of things have happened, right? Once the client to be is in your office, a couple of things have happened. Number one, you've got to realize you've won the battle because they don't talk to anyone about money, let alone make an appointment to proactively go and talk to people about money, because we don't do that. And we especially don't talk. I'm lumping all of the real financial planners in with the traditional financial services industry for a minute, so please don't be offended. But we certainly don't talk to any of us crooks. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to go talk to a financial planner. Those guys just, so if they've overcome all of that, and again, please realize, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but you have to realize nobody knows the difference between you. There's not some little way to look you up under the heading of real financial planner when everybody else is a fake one. Like, we're all in the same boat. So you've overcome all that, right? They're going to come talk to you about money. They may have even brought their statements, their detailed financial information, and they're going to overcome what they've read in the news and what they've heard from other people. So you've already won. So by one, I mean, like, the only thing you can do from there in terms of the trust, I think, is kind of screw it up by going down the same road we're all taught to go down, which, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, but if you come from the traditional sales side of this industry, you're taught to build credibility immediately. And so you do something like point at the degrees on the wall, which you shouldn't even have on the wall. And, oh, your kids play soccer, my kids play soccer too, like all that normal stuff. And then you're trained to spend the first 20 minutes to talking about yourself, how big the firm is, your skills, all that stuff. And now you've blown it. Like, try going on a first date where the other person spends 30 minutes talking about themselves. There is no second date. So all I'm saying is, instead, imagine how different it would be if instead you just opened, with something like, thank you for taking the time for coming today. And you're in a conference room with no diplomas on the wall, no proof of how smart you are. You just act as if you're the doctor, right? There's no need. Imagine if you went to a doctor and they spent their first 15 minutes trying to prove to you, like, I went to this school, like, I've operated on 300 people and only 2 have died. Like, everything's going to be okay. So let's just pretend like the way doctors normally do it. Like, it's the only place you go and somebody says, drop your drawers, and you just say, okay. So if we act like that, where we just say, look, thank you for taking the time for coming today. It really shows how serious you are about making good decisions with your money. The goal today is for me just to ask a whole series of questions so I can uncover real clearly, like, where you are today, and try to get clear about where you want to go, so that when you leave, we'll have all the information we need to put together a plan for you, or at least to start, put together a sort of a first draft of a plan. So I'm just going to ask a whole series of questions. Your job is just to relax and answer these questions, right? And then you dive into an open-ended question, and that question's followed by, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. Now you go through 45 to 60 minutes of that, and the people are going to leave. And at the end, you're not saying, hey, I want you to buy blue. Oh, you don't like blue? Here's green. Like, you're not asking them to buy anything. You just say, wow, it looks like I've got all the information I need. Let's schedule a time 2 to 3 weeks out. You know, da-da-da-da-da. They leave. They're going to walk to the car and be puzzled. Confused by the grace is the way I like to think of it. You know, scratching their heads saying, what just happened? Like, I just learned some stuff that I didn't even know about myself. I feel now more clear about my goals than when I went in. I didn't sign up for this, but that's amazing. Like, I'm really curious as to what they come up with, because I feel like they understand me better than anybody's ever understood me. They didn't try to sell me anything. What happened, right? Like, that's what we're trying to get to. Does that make sense?
It does. And talk about just a difference in attitude. You know, advisors ask me all the time, especially younger ones, who know, how do I build trust with clients? How do you build trust? And it sounds like your response would be, there's an assumption of trust. There's an assumption of expertise. You don't have to prove it. Just go in there. Just like a doctor doesn't need to build trust with you. They just kind of do their thing, and they show you their process as you go through it, and how different it is from maybe somebody else's.
Yeah, I think there's two. I love that question. Like, how do I build trust? And I love saying, like, how do I get people to trust me? I get asked that all the time. And my normal answer sounds a little sarcastic, but I don't mean it that way. It's like, well, try being trustworthy.
It's such a good point.
Right? Like, and I love the idea of being slightly, and please don't misunderstand this, but slightly professionally arrogant. And you could say another better way to say that would be professionally confident, like a doctor is. So look, you know what you're doing. I don't care what age you are. I don't really care how much experience. You have more experience than the clients, right? You know what you're doing. And all you're really there to do anyway is craft their plan, not yours, and not something based out of a textbook. You're there to craft their plan. And in order to craft their plan, all you have to do is uncover it. And so all you have to do is something you can do based on any level of experience, which is just ask really great questions and listen. And trust is not a function of the time, the quantity of time you've spent with someone. Trust is a function of the quality of the experience. And if you want to have an amazing experience with someone, ask them really great questions. John Bowen, a mentor of mine, always says, people will judge you by the quality of the questions you ask. And that doesn't really mean anything other than a simple question, which is, wow, that's really interesting. Tell me more about that. Like, lean into that stuff, and particularly sort of even learning to lean into the uncomfort of when you ask a question like that, because it's going to be the first time they've ever been asked, and they're going to lean back and say something like, gosh, I don't know. Don't fill that gap. Like, lean into that gap and say, almost like with your pen ready, even though you're not taking notes, but like, I'm waiting. You know, like, and maybe you can soften a little bit, like, here's what I heard you say. You know, I want to retire when I'm 55. Just all I meant was, could you tell me a little bit more about that? Where did that number come from? What are you expecting it to look like? That sort of experience, and you can test this by, I actually tested this once when I went to New York. It was part of the book publishing tour. So all the meetings were about me. And my wife said to me, sometimes you talk too much. Why don't you go ask with a goal of asking really great questions, even in meetings that are about you? And so my goal in every meeting I had was to hear somebody say, wow, that's a really good question, or geez, you ask good questions. And I would leave, and I tell you, this is a universal human experience. You can have somebody spend an hour with you where you just ask really great questions. They will leave, and you will feel like you added nothing to their lives or to the conversation because they were talking the whole time. They will leave and say something like this, gosh, that's one of the smartest people I've ever met. And then you'd be like, well, I didn't say anything. Well, just because all you did was listen, and they don't have that experience anymore.
Especially around money. You know, it's such a taboo topic. I mean, I remember reading a research study, and I, for the life of me, cannot find it. So we won't quote the research here. But basically the premise was that somebody stood on the street corner and asked people that walked by when the last time that they had sex was. And people would answer. And then they would say, how much money do you make? And the people would walk away really quickly. They wouldn't answer the money question, but they were happy to share the intimate details of their sex life. And it just kind of makes the point of, it's a really tough topic. And no one asks us good questions about money. It's really not a conversation that we have with anyone.
Totally, which makes it important to understand that if they've come, now getting them to come to your office, that's a whole different discussion. But if they've come, schedule an appointment to meet with you to talk about money. You're a financial planner. They're coming for a financial planning and meeting. Just take a deep breath for a minute and realize what a sacred trust that is, and don't blow it. Like, you've been given permission to come into my life because I scheduled a time to talk to you about money. Don't blow it. And don't blow it by trying to do the, you don't like green, I'll sell you blue garbage. And don't blow it by trying to prove to me how smart you are. I already have some little element of trust or I wouldn't be there. Now, if you go into this softer stuff of leaning into these questions and asking really good questions and listening, and somebody's like, hey man, hey kid, show me what you got, right? Like, what's your stock tip for the day? Well, that's also really great information too. Like, sorry, you must be looking for the guy down the street. That's not me. And you have a self-selecting process, but I've only found that like one out of hundreds of interviews, I've only found one person who was like, hey man, this isn't what I came for. I've had plenty of people say, this is not what I came for, but this is amazing because I understand how important it is now. How could you pretend to prescribe without ever taking the time to diagnose me? And thank you for doing that, because everybody else just throws prescriptions at me till I take one. But I've only had one person say, hey man, I just want a prescription. So, but my point is, yeah, nobody talks about money. Think about how incredibly valuable it is and what a sacred obligation and trust and beautiful, beautiful profession it is that you're that person. Yeah, like, you're that person.
Isn't what we do awesome?
It is
really
awesome if you do it the right. Like, if you understand what it's really all about, it's amazing. I used to think about it this way. Like, if I at least pretend to be an artist, and I've had art shows and we sell art, and I always, when I look at artists' website, there's always this section that says portfolio or work, and you click on it and think of like a photographer. You go and you'll see photographs. And I always like to think of, like, if a financial planner designed a website and you had to pretend you were an artist for a minute, and you're basically a performance artist, in your art, your medium is people's lives, and you click on work, what would those pictures be? Like, to me, that's amazing to think about. Like, I can think of, like, I won't use real names, but let's just say Dave and Brenda. I can think of a picture of Dave and Brenda who decided that instead of working till their kids were 18 and 20 and 21 with purple hair and nose rings and no interest in them because they had been working so hard, that they were going to flip that. And they were going to do a little bit of retirement when their kids were 8, 9, and 11. And they were going to take 6 months off and homeschool their kids in an RV, drive around the country visiting family and historical sites and make that part of the homeschooling. And they came and said, is that possible? And I remember asking them, well, before we get into the details of is it possible, would you do it if it was? Like, before I spend any time calculating it, would you? And I remember the deer in the headlight, like, whoa, yeah, I think we would. Well, we calculated it. We realized it was possible. It wasn't imprudent. I couldn't tell them it was going to work out perfectly 30 years later, but it wasn't stupid. They did it, right? Like, that would be one of the little boxes under the button on my website that says work or portfolio. Like, if we think about it that way, you start to realize you're a performance artist, right? And your medium is people's lives, and you're trying to figure out, how can I help them live more aligned lives so they look back and go, without you, we would have never done. They would not have done that. They've told me they would not have done that if it weren't for my advice. That's heavy stuff, right? Like, that's amazing. Like, you look back and go, I changed. Their kids are now, how old? They're like 16. The oldest is 16, and we still see them. And I'm actually the godfather of one of them, despite not being Catholic. And when we see them, they tell me like that. When I ask them, like, oh yeah, that 6 months we spent on the road was super, super impactful in terms of how it shaped our lives. That's just a dramatic example, but I could go through with every client, Brian and Denise. Anyway, like every one of us could go through those stories. When we start thinking that way, I mean, how cool.
It really is. And it's something that anytime I go back and talk to college kids at universities, I just want to tell them, like, what you're learning isn't what we do. It's part of the tools that we use, but ultimately financial planning is about helping people live their great life. And their great life is different from anybody else's. So some people want to do that. Some people want to travel. Some people want to start businesses. And you have to figure out what that is. And people look at our profession as if we just do investments and sell people insurance, but it's so much more. We do get the opportunity to change lives and to help people live great lives. And that's what makes it so much fun.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So that's your discovery process, your introductory meeting, which sounds absolutely nothing like an introductory meeting I've ever been a part of. So if you ever start taking on new clients, you let me know, because I want to see this, hands on. Where does your planning process go from there? So you've established this relationship, by asking great questions. You've shown just how different what you do is from anybody else that they've potentially interviewed, and just tried to, hawk a product or whatnot. Where do you go from there in your relationship with clients?
Yeah, so the goal of that first meeting, which I've repeated, I don't know, hundreds of times to people, is the goal of this first meeting is for me just to get really clear. And, I have to mention here that I don't feel like anything I do is all that, uniquely creative. Much of it was learned on the shoulders of giants. Like I mean, John Bowen and his process taught me a lot. Bill Backrack and I don't love the name of the book, but the content of the book's awesome. Values-based selling. George Kinder, I just felt like I've rubbed shoulders with some amazing people who've taught me this stuff, and I've sort of taken it and tweaked it and amalgamated it into my process. But I just want to be clear, those people and many more deserve lots of credit for helping. So you'll see threads of that through, threads of other people's work through my tapestry for sure. And I always try to acknowledge them. But so the goal, right? Like the goal of this first meeting was simply for me to ask enough really good questions to understand really clearly where you are today, get an idea of where you want to go, and maybe most importantly, why you want to go there, right? So I just tell people that. So let's get started, right? Boom. We dive into a whole series of questions. And you can imagine all those questions. I've never asked anybody to fill out a questionnaire. I think your job, in fact, my wife, we went to meet with an estate attorney and he had us fill out a questionnaire. My wife got so mad. She's like, well, your job is to fill out. I didn't come here to fill out a questionnaire. Ask me the question. So I feel like our jobs are to ask the right question so we can fill out the questionnaire when they leave, right? Like, so we sit down, we fill out the questionnaire. Anyway, when you leave, I want to have enough information so that we can get together as a team here and put together a plan that we think represents the best chance of you reaching these goals. And then I always say, let me be careful about the word plan real quick. I don't want you thinking that means a 2-inch thick book that you'll never look at. My goal is to keep it to one page. I've been saying that for 10 years. My goal is to keep it to one page. You could think of it as a executive summary if you want. Now, the risk here is that you don't think just because it's one page that you think it's super simple, and it'll be backed up. But if you'd like to see it, I'd be happy to print out the hundreds of pages of sort of stuff that goes into it, but you're not going to be any better off. So I'm going to just, if it's okay with you, what you're going to see is the prescription, except you'll be able to read this one. You can't read most prescriptions.
It's very true.
Right? You're going to see the prescription, but I'm not going to give you all the research that went into it, if that's okay with you. And most people are like, oh, geez, thank you. Yeah. So they leave. And then, right, we go back to the notes, the recording, however it is you kept track of what went on in that meeting. And you then put together, right, like whatever it is you use for that tool. And my goal, and I normally tell this to clients, look, I want you to understand that when you come back, what we have will represent our best guesses at the future. And I want to be clear about that word. I use the word guess. They're going to be guesses, right? There's a bunch of assumptions that goes into this. The important part is not the document you see when you get back. The important part is going to be the process of updating that document and continuing to work on it. And I draw it sort of like a funnel. Actually, what I normally draw is an X down at the bottom left-hand corner of a whiteboard, and I say current reality. I label it. This is one of the drawings on the website. If you want it for the show notes, make sure we'll give it to you. Down in the bottom left-hand corner, it says current reality, and then I draw up in the upper right-hand corner, I say goal. and I tell people in the first meeting or at the beginning of the second meeting, I know what you want is a straight line, and I draw a straight line between those two. And in fact, the document we're going to give you is going to sort of look like a straight line. But we want you to know that we know it's not going to work that way. Like, let's just not pretend. It is not going to work that way. Just like any cross-country flight or journey or whatever, you're going to have a flight plan that represents that straight line. And every pilot I've ever asked has a flight plan, a detailed flight plan, and it represents that straight line. But then when I ask those pilots, same pilots, how often does your flight go according to plan? Every one of them has said never. The wind speed's a little different, the storm, whatever works out. So what's the important part? And then I draw a squiggly line that goes above and below that straight line, and it slowly narrows in on that same goal, right? It gets progressively more narrow as we get closer and closer to the goal. And I say, look, the important part are these course corrections that we're making out here at the edges. All right, so while the document's going to represent a straight line, we're not committed to the plan. We're committed to the process of planning. And so they leave. We come back. We say, look, here's our best guess at what your future looks like. You're in the ballpark. We're excited for you. Congratulations. You've done a lot of good work, or whatever it is. Sorry, you're not even close. We need to, whatever it is, you have to have those conversations. Then you say, look, here's the 3 things that I think you need to do. And I don't know if it's 3 or 5. I like 3. And that's on the 1-page plan. It's like, look, here's what you told me your goals were. Here's the why you told me, your values. Here's where you are today. Did we understand all that correctly? Okay, great. I'm glad we got that clear. Because if we didn't, we'd have to start over. Or not start over, we'd make some tweaks. Everything we did is based on this information. Did we get that right? Yes, we did. There's all nodding in the room. Great. Based on that, here's our suggestions. Right? Here's the 2 or 3 things that I think you need to do over the next 6 months to get closer. And then when we're done with those, guess what? We're going to move to the next 2 or 3 things. And guess what? We're going to keep repeating that process over and over and over and over and over until you die.
Because there's always going to be 2 or 3 new things.
Yeah, like, hey, we've paid off the house. Cool. What do we do next, right? Like, why? That's the part I think we forget. Like, financial planning is a big, giant guess. And of course, we're trained guessers, and we're going to make the best guess we can, and we're going to make informed guesses. But it's, at the end of the day, they're still guesses. And your goals are going to change. That's why I love the idea of a 1-page financial plan. Is you don't need to have it chiseled in stone, right? It's a Sharpie and a piece of cardstock. I mean, it's probably going to be a typewritten executive summary on 1 page, but it's really easy to say, hey, great, that's the document. It's the working document. It's the picture on the front of the box that tells us that as we're building the kids' toy, if we're headed in the right direction. Are the 200-page instruction manual in the box important? Of course it is if you want the thing to work. But what we look at more often is the picture on the front of the box, right? So we just keep updating that and saying, okay, what are you working on now? Cool. Why don't you start saving an extra $50 a month towards the kids' education? Look, 2 years later, you're funded. Cool. Why don't we move on to what are you feeling now? Because remember, the whys are going to change too. Think of all that, right? The why is going to change. Those values do change, right? Like independence used to be super important to me, but now freedom's more important. The goals are going to change, and all your assumptions are going to change. So there's no question the process of ongoing course correction is way more important than the actual plan itself. In fact, the plan is worthless without the ongoing process of planning.
It really goes back to the fact that financial planning is much more art than science, and yet we try to treat it as just a science.
Yeah, I love that idea. I just love the idea of advisor as artist.
And I think that, you're hitting such a good point. When a client sits down in our office, we want, in many ways, we're trained to confuse them into buying us. We want to show them how smart we are and confuse them with all the data and the details and show them, look, there's no way you can do this yourself. We want to be like WebMD, where we just give them all the diagnosis, and every time I put in my diagnosis, I have brain cancer 100% of the time. It scares me every time. And we just want to overwhelm people. And what you're proposing is that we sell simplicity.
Alan, who likes to be treated that way?
No one.
I know. We've all been taught that, right? We've all been taught that complexity is either a selling tool, and that selling tool is sort of like I'll dig a hole, throw you in it, and I'll look down and say, hey, Mr. Klein, I'm the only one with the rope. Or either a selling tool, or it's just a subtle little thing that we've mistaken complexity for a sign of an intellectual gift. Either way, Either way, no one likes to be treated that way. No one does. Nobody likes to feel like, oh, these people are so smart. What they like to feel is understood, right? What they want to feel is you're the guide. Like what they want to understand is instead of being confused by the complexity, they want to feel like, oh my gosh, I understand for once. This fear we have that they're going to run off and do it themselves is so misplaced. Like I have tried, I would challenge anybody listening, try, give away everything, all the information, all the secrets, open up every cookie jar, write about your process. In fact, if you want to build a client base fast, start writing exactly about what you do every week and send it out in an email. Right? Like nobody, I can tell you, well, yeah, okay, I can think of one set of clients. They were both doctors. Yeah, I won't mention their names. They were both doctors. They came to me, and after 2 years of being clients, they're like, "Carl, you've taught us so well that we're just going to do it on our own." And I was like, yeah, one experience out of, I don't know what the number is now, but hundreds, right? That's fine. The other people are like, "Wow, thank you for showing us. Will you do it for us?" But nobody. The point is, nobody. You're right. Nobody likes to be scared into using you, and nobody likes to be talked down to. These are smart, intelligent people, or they wouldn't be calling you. I mean, most of them are at least somewhat successful in their own work, or else they aren't asking for your help. So I think if we flip all that and say, okay, forget selling for a minute. Not that I'm against the word. I have no problem with it. But why don't we treat people the way we'd like to be treated? Let's say please and thank you. Let's finish what we start. Let's show up on time. Let's do all those basic things. You'll have more work than you'll ever need to worry about if you just have the time to keep repeating that over and over and over.
One of the things that I love about your process, and so you've gone through what's the introductory meeting look like? What does the actual plan, development and delivery look like? You haven't actually mentioned money yet. Am I correct in remembering that you don't charge clients up through this point in the process?
Yeah. So also you need to realize, I don't really do this anymore right now. But yeah, just a couple of years ago, this was exactly how I did it. And this is how I tell real advisors, like the whole BAM community, this is a pretty good insight into how we do things. But yeah, I don't charge. Now I can see both sides. My approach to this, my way of dealing with the sense of kind of obligation and the sense of calling that so many of us feel in this profession has been that everybody deserves this much. Like, even if I can't help them and even if we're not a good fit, I think this is a mutual exploration process up to this point. And I even tell people in the first meeting, you will not be asked, nor would we even accept a commitment at the end of this meeting or the second meeting. Just relax. Relax. We're going to have this first meeting. I've already mentioned what the goal of the first meeting is. The second meeting, we're going to present really clearly. We're going to make sure we understood what you said. I tell people this in the beginning of the first meeting. We're going to make sure we understood what you said, and then we're going to walk you through our suggestions to get you there. And at the end, and then we're going to walk you through exactly how much it would cost on an ongoing basis and everything you need to know to make an educated decision. And at the end, we're going to give you that document. Hopefully it'll be one page. We want you to leave with it, and we wouldn't accept. This used to drive my wife crazy. We won't ask or accept a commitment at that point. We want you to leave with it. And in fact, I would suggest if you've got a friend, a colleague, an attorney, a CPA, a mom, a dad, or if you have any other advisors in mind, that you go get that out of your system. Like, go meet with them. You can show them this document, do whatever you want. Because once you make that commitment, we almost feel like we've kind of reserved a seat for you on this kind of limited plane that we have. And we want you to be committed, and we want to be committed. And so we feel like these two meetings are, at the very least, you'll learn a lot. You can relax a little bit. You'll walk out of here. If we decide not to work together, I think you'll be in a much better place to make good decisions about your financial lives than you would have been before. And to be honest, through this process, it's a mutual exploration. Like, we want to make sure that you're a good fit for us as well. Like, the last thing we would want to do is, beg you to become a client and then have you regret it or us regret it for the next 10 years of our lives. So just relax. We're going to explore this. It'll become abundantly clear whether this is a good fit for us after our second meeting. So that's how I handle it. So then if at the end of that second meeting we feel good about it, I often found myself making this statement. Hey, look, I've really enjoyed the last 2 meetings we've had. It's become clear that we would really enjoy working with you. And I think people feel good about that, like they like to hear it. It's not like a sales pitch. It's the honest truth. We would really enjoy working with you. And it's pretty clear, given where you want to go and your goals and all the reasons why you've told us about, we would be excited to be involved. What we want you to do now is take this document, you go think about it. We'll check in with you in about a week. And if you feel good about it, why don't we schedule this third meeting? And at that meeting, we've mutually decided we'll formalize our arrangement and we'll start working together. How about that? Anyway, that's been the process.
So to summarize everything we've talked about, it's not just a small tweak to the process. You can't just like suddenly start drawing things on a board and think that that's going to suddenly change the way that you do financial planning. It really takes a mindset shift for the advisor in terms of why are they even doing financial planning? What is it that they offer clients? Because if they feel what they offer clients is just a rock star asset allocation, then they're not going to be able to utilize a lot of these principles. And they're probably, in both of our opinions, I think, going to suffer as a business going forward. But it's a real mindset shift that it is more art than science. It is about helping clients figure out what they want to do with their life and being willing to give away the expertise, because that's not why clients are coming to us. They're not coming to us just because we can write a 200-page book with a bunch of numbers in it. They're coming to us because they really just want our help.
Yeah, it's just super important to understand. Everything else, I think. Everything else. Now, look, technical chops are the price of entry. Like if you don't know what you're doing, which again, I'm preaching to the choir, then you have no business doing any of this anyway. So don't.
Very true.
I think it's important for us to remember, like, this isn't just something, I'm really good. Like, no, you got to know what you're doing, and you got to have the technical chops to even price of entry, right? But that's not what people are going to pay for, because most of that stuff, they don't even know what it is. So yeah, I think focusing on what makes a human being unique is that connection and the empathy and the ability to sort of guide me through, keep me committed. Like somebody asked me why I would hire a planner. It was the only 3 things I could think of were help me get really clear about my goals. Now I wouldn't expect a client to come in and say that. Hey, hi, I'm here for you to help me. But that's what they really want. Help me get clear about my goals. Remind me of what I said they were when I'm thinking of doing something stupid. And then be the thing between me and stupid. Like those are the 3 things that I think we get paid for.
I think that's such a good way to put it. That's why we should hire planners. Right. And yet I would be curious to know how many financial advisors actually have their own planner. Yep. So kind of wrapping up, there's a couple of different things that I want to mention and ask you some questions about things you've been working on. One is that folks may already know this, but Carl, you're going to be doing a 2-hour workshop at the XYPN conference in Charlotte in September. Now, this is a giant tease for anyone that hasn't already bought a ticket because we just sold out. So if you don't already have a ticket, you're going to have to push it off to next year. But Carl's going to be there doing a 2-hour workshop on exactly what we're talking about today, which is literally, it's called The Master Communicator is the name of the 2-hour workshop, but it's literally going through your process. And I'm really excited to see it because, like I said, I would become a client just to see it. So I think it's going to be awesome to just see what is your process? What does it really look like? Because it can feel pie in the sky because it's not how we were trained. It's not how we grew up being told to do financial planning.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm super excited to do it. Yeah, it will just be an expanded version of what we just went through.
And there's a couple of ways to get information from Carl. One is there's a book released, in March called The One-Page Financial Plan. So if you don't believe a financial plan can be done in 1 page, I promise it can be. It is a phenomenal resource. It's such a good book. And I didn't run this by you, but we're going to give away 10 copies of the One-Page Financial Plan in the outro of each show. Listeners hear how to sign up for our free VIP community. And so the first 10 people that sign up after this call will get a book in the mail with the One-Page Financial Plan, because I love that book. I think I'm so glad that you wrote it. I have to say.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm flattered. And yeah, that's awesome. And let's make sure they're signed copies for sure. We'll up the ante a little bit. So we'll give away 10 signed copies.
Well, I don't know that they want me to sign them. No, I'm kidding.
I know. No.
And the last piece is you were telling me just before we started recording about a new I would call it like a help implementing these theories, in terms of like literal tangible help. So could you tell folks or tell listeners about kind of what you're working on that will actually give them the resources to be able to implement more of these ideas in their practice?
Yeah, so we're working on a little sort of membership program or community program called Art for Advisors, with this sort of subtitle, The Art of Conversation. And it will just be a subscription base where every week you get a mini, an idea / mini case study / example or lesson on this, along with one image that we've picked from the library of now close to 400, and coaching on how to use the image, right? So those images now, you can buy them for $99 and you get a license to use them any way you want. It's a Creative Commons 4 license, which essentially just means you have to give me attribution, right? You can do anything you want with it as long as and the attribution is built into the image, so it's not a problem. With this membership program, you'll get one a week, and along with a weekly lesson and access to a monthly Q&A conference call for members only. And that, at least right now, that's going to be $99 a month for that service. And I guess what you and I talked about, Alan, is we're still in kind of, and when I say beta, we're still in sort of invitation only. The program's not really beta. We've been working on this for 10 years. But in terms of signing up, we're sort of in invitation only beta. And that will be at a discounted sort of lifetime price. So we haven't decided yet, but I think it's going to be $79 instead of $99. So if you're interested in being involved and just learning more about it, we can send you information. All you need to do is you can just email me, Carl@behaviorgap.com, Carl@behaviorgap.com, and we'll send you all the information, give you access to a page where you could sign up for $79 as part of the invitation only beta group, and you can cancel anytime you want. So you go through 1 month and you don't like it, keep the 4 or 5 images we've sent you, the lessons, and cancel, and we will absolutely part friends. So that's the program.
And one of the other things that they will learn, and we'll put Carl's email address in the show notes, one of the other things they'll learn is that you are probably, and we should have you on a show just to talk about your delegation skills. You'll actually hear back from some of Carl's amazing staff who just are rock stars. You're such a great delegator. And so when people email you, they'll probably see some of that delegation at work and getting signed up for the program.
Yeah, but that's absolutely true. But what people don't realize is I still see every one of those emails, and I don't see it in email form. It's a whole nother story. You're right. But I don't see the inside of email, because if I do, bad things happen inside my brain. But I still read all those comments. So I would love your feedback on this show. I'd love your feedback on the sort of the process we went through. I'd love your feedback on the sort of the membership community we're building. And I will see and respond appropriately to that feedback. But if you want stuff to get done, you got to get it in the hands of the people who do the stuff better than you.
Very true.
That's the team here. So I care enough about people that email to delegate appropriately to make sure their replies. Because if I didn't, they wouldn't get a reply ever. Right? That's how I phrase it.
That's such a good way to phrase that, because it's so true. Okay, so last question is, and we ask all of our guests this question. If you could go back, whether it's in your 20s or kind of getting started in the career, kind of launching into this, basically becoming an artist accidentally, if you could go back and tell yourself one thing, if there's just one thing you wish you had known then that you know now, what do you think that one piece of advice or information would be?
Lean into fear. And let me just explain it real quickly. I wanted to say, don't be scared. That little kernel you feel, I think of it sometimes as like a little piece of sand in my shoe. That little in your soul or your spirit or your psyche, whatever you want to call it, saying you can do things differently. Like, no, you don't have to do that. Like, you don't have to settle, and you don't have to be reasonable, and you don't have to, like, that little feeling you have that says, hey, no, I want to change the world in this little way. I want to make my small dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs used to say. Do it, right? Don't be scared, because I know when you go to do something different, and especially younger people in our profession, when you go to do something different than the way it's been done, you're going to have a giant blow dryer pointing at your face with all sorts of heat and uncomfort, and it's going to push you to just push through it, right? Like, I wanted to say don't be scared, but I realized that's not the right thing, because you are going to be scared. Do it anyway, right? Like, I've learned to love that fear. Like, I feel it almost every day now where I'm like, oh my gosh, who gave me permission to do that? Who gave me, today's Thursday, isn't it? Yeah. Today's the day that I have to sit down at a desk with a Sharpie in Park City, Utah, and draw something to go on what every week is on the most emailed list at the New York Times. In the New York Times, like, who gave me permission? Like, you're just a kid from Utah. What in the world are you doing? And every week I have to say, I'm going to do it anyway. Right. And the difference between people who create and change and make, and I hope I'm in that group, but I don't know. I'm not necessarily, but the difference is not that they stop feeling that fear. It's that they've learned to do it anyway. And so that, I know you have it, right? I know you felt it, that little sense you have that you can do things different. You can change the world. You can make a massive impact on, even if you've made a massive impact on 100 families for the rest of your life, think of the difference, right? Do it anyway. That would be the piece of advice.
I love it. This has been so much fun. Carl, thank you again for taking the time to be on the show. I know listeners got a ton out of it. I know I did. So this has been so much fun.
My pleasure. It was really, really an honor. Thank you.
What an awesome interview. That was as much fun as I expected it to be. Carl is always a delight. I have always wanted to peek under the hood at Carl's financial planning process, since I knew it would be something just totally different than I've ever seen in the financial planning profession. Now, as we mentioned in the interview, if you are one of the next 10 advisors to sign up for our VIP community, you will get a free copy, a free signed copy, as you heard, of his latest book, The One-Page Financial Plan. It is an awesome, awesome book. I highly recommend it. Even if you don't get a free copy from us, definitely you can check out the show notes at xyplanningnetwork.com/2. And you can get a link to his book. I highly recommend that you buy it. It's probably the type of book that you would want to give your clients. You can see how to sign up for our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/2, or listen to the outro for instructions. Now, before we go, I want to give another shout out to our launch week sponsor, Low Load Insurance Services. I have personally worked with Low Load for over 4 years now, and have to say that they are an incredibly valuable member of your financial planning team. Now, as fee-only advisors, we simply can't transact insurance for our clients, and telling clients to shop for coverage with their local insurance agent is certainly not ideal. So I have found through working with Low Load that they allow me to provide such a higher level of service than I can provide on my own, particularly in relation to the insurance work, because they have a growing team of over 16 insurance specialists that know the ins and outs of the insurance industry. So if you'd like to learn more, go to llis.com, or you can check out the link in our show notes at xyplanningnetwork.com/2. And also be sure to tune in for episode 5 for an in-depth interview with Mark Maurer, the CEO of LLIS. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Look forward to seeing you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.